I think that visit made me really understand how, climate change is more than statistics, and it's bigger than, any numbers that we could talk about. When we see how, the statistics are talking about the thousands of people that are, that have died, for example, in Libya, it's very possible to read 5,000 people and then not really think about how, that, in my country, most of the schools, especially secondary schools, there are about 1,000 students. So if you are to count 5,000 people that have been killed, for example, because of floods, those are 5 whole schools. So I think many times when we read the numbers, we don't really see how big it is, but when you actually think about how, if you're to count one individual, you realize how much of an impact climate change is. And that is why my work has been around raising awareness about the impacts of climate change, and also raising awareness about the need to address the elephant in the room, the one that is greatly responsible for the climate crisis, and that is fossil fuels. And I had the opportunity to be a part of the march to end fossil fuels yesterday, calling upon, developed countries, especially the United States, to be the climate leaders that they need to be, and to address the climate crisis. Because if we are to, talk about the need to address climate adaptation, loss and damage, we also need to talk about the root cause. Because when you find yourself in a ditch, the first thing to do is to stop digging. You don't figure out how to get out of the ditch. And that's how I see the crisis that we are in. Is we need to close the tap, and we need to bring in renewables, and we need to address the energy poverty in countries in the global south, especially in the African continent. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vanessa. And thank you for your kind acknowledgement of the role of elders before you. But in particular, I think you've brought us into what is the heart of our discussion now, the nexus between climate and health. You spoke so eloquently about that, and now I'm going to ask Vanessa, the other Vanessa, Vanessa Kerry, to give us a short essence of the report which has been circulated, which I hope most of us have read, but just and then I'm going to call on Vanina Laurent-Ledru to follow you from Foundation S, and then it will be an open discussion for whoever. And the best thing to do when it's open discussion, so I can see, is put up your flag like this, and I'll be very happy to call you. So, Vanessa Kerry.
Thank you very much for letting me join this morning. And just for background, I'm a physician by training, and I run a nonprofit that builds healthcare capacity by partnering with governments in sub-Saharan Africa to train workforce. And I was recently appointed the WHO Special Envoy for Climate Change and Health out of recognition of the fact that the work that we've been doing in training the workforce, we realize that we already have a shortage of workforce, but we are facing a bigger and bigger crisis because of what we're seeing in climate change. And we work in places like Malawi that has seen the largest and longest cholera outbreak it's ever seen because of tropical storms that pass not once over southern Africa, but go out to sea, return, put huge amounts of rain into, and affect the disease patterns, wash out bridges so women can't deliver. We have to stand up new birthing units. And so as our work got harder, we realized that we're not ready for the pandemic that is coming from climate change in terms of health issues. And so, and it's everything. It's NCDs, it is vector-borne diseases, it is maternal health, it is mental health, it is direct trauma. And I want to just share a quick story before I talk a little bit more about the report. I'm also a mother, probably my most important role. I have 2 small children, and I was putting my daughter to bed about 5 days ago, and she said, "Mommy, I can't sleep." And I said, "Why not?" She goes, "Because the Earth's going to end, and I'm scared." And I said, "Okay, you want to talk about that?" She said, "No, I don't, actually. I'm too scared to talk about it." I said, "Well, do you want to write it out so you at least get it out of your system?" She said, "Sure, I'll write it down." So she wrote it down, and then she crossed it out and she asked me to burn it so her thoughts would go away. I said, no, okay, I'll figure out how to do that, but sure. The thing that was striking to me though is like as a mother, yes, I'm terrified that my daughter's having these thoughts, but my daughter is falling asleep safe in her bed with her stuffed animals, totally fine. And this was basically the same day that 20,000 people went missing in Libya because of torrential downpour, a failure to invest in infrastructure. And there's a mother that is not putting her child to bed in Libya, not because her child is dead, but because she is dead, because her entire family is dead. And the reality of what we are facing is not just our health and well-being and the fact that climate change is killing us daily. This is justice, this is a cycle of poverty and inequity, this is gender equity, this is a fundamental question of the values that we live, the system we're gonna go by. And I don't wanna just make this a doom and gloom, because I actually think there's immense possibility. This room is full of power and opportunity. This city is full of power and opportunity, especially this week, and the question becomes, what are we gonna do about it? A colleague of mine pointed out recently that we shouldn't be talking about whether we're on track for 1.5 versus 2.4, 2.6. We should be counting this in terms of the lives lost, not the degrees Celsius. And that's exactly what we need to be doing in this moment. So I think there's three really critical things, and I think the report covers, you know, a lot of this as we get into it. And everyone has a copy, so I encourage you to take a look. But I think the first thing that we have to realize is that climate and health is actually every single sector that we look at. It's our economic growth, it's a household's ability to survive and thrive and not fall into poverty. It is our security. It is migration. 1.2 billion people are going to be climate refugees by 2050. It is our, you know, it is our mental health. It is our gender equity. Women are getting sexually assaulted in Kenya as they walk farther and farther for water. And we're losing progress on HIV now, and we're perpetuating old cycles of abuse. So we have the ability to have a win-win if we intervene with a climate and a health-centered approach to climate change. Secondly, we do what we measure. And what we measure is often guided by the wrong metrics. And we have to start to think about not fast and quick wins, but how do we measure qualitatively for our well-being? And that's where I think women matter. Because we also need a new kind of leadership right now. A courageous, compassionate leadership that is going to prioritize the right things. And so my call to action is to think about how we can transform from expedient and poor choices that are about quick wins, victory, and ego, to being about long-term compassion and security and well-being. And I think that I'm grateful for having been part of the Collective Minds, because, which is the Foundation S group that wanted to think about how do we create a response to climate and health in this moment, and how do we transform what the conversation looks like. And so what they've really outlined is a report that creates the call to action around a health-centered approach to climate change that focuses very much on mobilizing more financing. We just fundamentally have to unlock some of the financing that exists in the world. It's being held by increasingly small, number of hands. And how do we unlock that and get smart and build blended financing and catalytic financing and bring together public-private partnership to be transformative for this moment and to really respond? Because it turns out if you invest in health, it's savings, not a cost. The return on investment is about $2 to $4 for every dollar invested in health. Secondly, communities. Flexible funding into the communities in a context where the funding is, can be best utilized and most rapidly utilized in a really dynamic way where the solutions are already found. I mean, communities have been adapting to climate change for years. The problem is now it's accelerating faster and out of reach to the resources available. So we need to help close that gap so that these communities and those that are most vulnerable and on the front line are not as vulnerable. I recognize that Vanessa's going to speak about this as well, so I might allow you to continue on the report rather than because I've been talking a lot. But just to say that I think the question becomes, how do we take these smart recommendations and how do we start to transform the world that we live in? Because it has to happen now, and there's no such thing as too ambitious for this moment. And I think that's what we need to strive to do. So it's been a pleasure to think from a public health hat with a private foundation hat about how we can take this moment. But I'd love for you to also share.
Thank you very much, Vanessa. And before I pass on to Vanina, because you've stimulated me,